All right, today we are talking about factoring, still factoring trinomials, but today our a value is not equal to 1. All right, so when our a value is not equal to 1, first of all, we always look for GCF. Always look for GCF first. Here we have nothing in common that we can take out. Today we learned how to factor when my a value here was a 1. All right, well, if it's not a 1, we check for perfect squares first. 2 is not a perfect square. 15 is not a perfect square. So we're going to have to do what we call factoring by grouping. Okay. Now, factoring by grouping, we learned the other day, factoring by grouping, we have to have 4 terms. So we group the first 2 together, and we group the last 2 terms together. Well, since I don't have 4 terms, it's going to be our job to create 4 terms in order to group them. Well, I like to use what we call the M method here. Okay, the first step of the M method means to drop down the first term, which is 2x squared, and drop down the last term, which is negative 15. So now the M means to multiply. So I'm going to multiply my 2 times my negative 15. M means to multiply those guys, and that's going to give me negative 30. So 30 is my product. Sorry, negative 30 in this case is my product. Okay, I'm still using my middle term of negative 7 as my sum. So the options for negative 30, 1 times negative 30, 2 times negative 15, 3 times negative 10, 5 times negative 6, 6 times negative 5, 10 times negative 3, 15 times negative 2, and 30 times negative 1. Lots of options that multiply to give me negative 30. Okay, we're looking for the ones that add up to negative 7. The one that adds up to negative 7 is right here, 3 minus 10. So we're going to use a positive 3. So what we're doing is basically we're splitting this negative 7 up into 2 separate terms. So we have our first term, our last term, and we're splitting the middle term up into 2 terms. And that'll give us 4 terms. So I'm using a 3 and negative 10. So I have a positive 3x and a negative 10x. Okay, if I combine 3x minus 10x, that combines to give me negative 7x's in the middle. So it's still the same thing. We've just turned negative 7x into 2 terms. So now we can group. So now I can factor by grouping now that I have 4 terms. So just like we learned the other day, we'll group our first 2 terms together and our last 2 terms together. So we look for GCF just in the first 2 terms. The only thing those guys have in common that I can take out is an x. So if you take an x out, you got to tell me what's left over. 2x plus 3 is what's left over. And now in the second term, the second parenthesis, we always take out whatever's in front, so we got to take out the negative. GCF between 10x and minus 15, the greatest common factor there is a 5. But now you got to tell me what's left over. Negative 10 divided by negative 5 is 2 with an x left over. Negative 15 divided by negative 5, negative divided by negative is positive 3. And so again, 2x plus 3 should be the same as each other. So my final answer here, in one of my parentheses, I'm going to have my GCFs, which is x minus 5. In the other parenthesis, I'm going to have the 2x plus 3. All right, example 4. I'll leave example 1 up there just kind of as a guideline. Example 4, always look for GCFs first. There's no GCF here. My a value is not a 1, it's a 5. Okay, we can save ourselves time if the front term and the back term are perfect squares, but 5 is not a perfect square and 6 is not a perfect square. So we're going to have to factor by grouping, or like I like to call it, the M method. Okay, so the M method, the first thing we do is we drop down our first term, which is 5x squared. We drop down our last term, which is negative 6. Okay, and the middle term is what we're going to need to split up into 2 separate terms. So again, these legs tell me to multiply 5 times negative 6, which is negative 30. Again, there's a lot of options for negative 30 that I've already created over here. so I'm not going to rewrite them. But now I'm looking for the numbers that add up to the middle term of positive 7. Here we chose these guys because they added up to negative 7. Well, now I need to know which ones add up to positive 7. So if I look at all my options that I've already come up with, the one that adds up to positive 7 is going to be 10 minus 3. So positive 10 and negative 3. So those are the two numbers that I'm going to split my 7 up into. Positive 10x and negative 3x. 10x minus 3x, if I combine those like terms, those would combine to give me 7x. So I've created 4 terms now, and now that I have 4 terms, I can group them. GCF in the first parenthesis, 5 and 10, the GCF there is 5. They also, but look at the variables, they also have an x in common. So if you took out a 5 and an x, what's left over? X plus 10 divided by 5 leaves me with 2. I took that x out, so there's nothing left over there. Now the second parenthesis, I always need to take out that sign. So between 3 and 6, the GCF there is 3. I'll take that out, and there's no variables in common. 3 divided by 3 leaves me with positive 1, so there's just a 1x. Negative 6 divided by negative 3 leaves me with positive 2 left over there. And so if you look, x plus 2, they're the same. I know I'm on the right track. So my final answer here, I take my GCFs, 5x minus 3, that goes into one parenthesis, and then the x plus 2 goes into the second parenthesis. All right. Number 2 here. I've got time for one more example. Again, no GCFs to take out. My A value is not a 1. It's easy if it's a 1, but it's not a 1. So we check perfect squares. The front and the back are not perfect squares. So we're going to have to factor by grouping, or like I like to call it, the M method. First step of the M method, we drop down our first term, 3x squared. We drop down our last term of positive 15. Now we're still going to add to get the middle number, but I need to multiply here to find my product. 3 times 15, that's 45. So if we come up for all the options for 45, 1 times 45, 2, 3, does 3 go into 45? I don't know. Anyways, I know 5 times 9. Okay, well that's going to add up to 14. I need it to add up to a negative 14. So my signs are going to be negatives. All right, the signs are the same. They're both negatives. So I'm using negative 5 and negative 9. So negative 5x minus 9x. Again, if I combine those x terms, negative 5 minus 9 more, that gives me negative 14x's. Once I have all 4 terms, I can then group them, group the first 2 and the last 2. The GCF in the first parenthesis looks like we just have an x in common there. What's left over? 3x minus 5. If I take an x out of both of those, 3x minus 5. The second parenthesis, I have to take out that sign, so a negative. GCF with 9 and 15 is going to be 3. What's left over? Negative 9 divided by negative 3 is 3, with an x left over. 15 divided by negative 3 is negative 5. So I checked to see if I did that right. 3x minus 5 on both, yes. So my final answer here, the GCFs go into one parenthesis, so x minus 3. And then the 3x minus 5 goes into the other parenthesis. So that's what we call factoring by grouping. You'll hear me call it the M method. I like to use this M to keep myself organized on what to do. Drop down the outer terms and then multiply the first and the last number. That gives me my product. Then out of those options, which one adds to my middle number of negative 14? And that tells me my 2 terms I'm going to use here. Then once I've got 4 terms, I can split them up. I can group them and take the GCFs out of each, like we learned the other day.